Whoever decided to let Michael Heseltine loose on Jacob Rees-Mogg at GBeebies needs an award. Michael Heseltine, in his golden years, in his 90s, you have to admire him. He is absolutely incredible. He started the interview by referring to Jacob as William, which is his father's name. Whether that was conscious or not, it wrong-footed his opponent. And by the end of the debate, Jacob Rees-Mogg couldn't press end fast enough. Enjoy the ride.
Now, I'm really delighted to be joined by the former Deputy Prime Minister, Michael the Lord Heseltine, to discuss this. He won't know that when I got appointed Minister for Government Efficiency, I took in a copy of his memoirs because he was one of the few people who managed to make the government efficient when he held office. Anyway, Lord Heseltine, thank you for joining me. I think we will not get migration under control as long as we are members of the European Convention on Human Rights, and that we need to domesticate our law. But I understand that's not your view.
No, your problem, William, is you're obsessed with the European relationship, and we'll never solve the migration problem unless we do it on a European scale. And the quicker we recognise the scale of what's happening and the scale of the increase that is likely to come, the quicker we will seek accord with our European neighbours and pursue a policy designed to cope with the scale of the problem.
But we've seen just in the last week a number of European neighbours suggest that the European Court should be reformed, and the British government hasn't joined that. So we're not even joining with our European neighbours in trying to get the European Court under control.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the futile problem that Brexit has delivered. We have absented ourselves from the corridors of power in Europe. And the quicker we wake up to that and get back at the table and negotiate Britain's self-interest in the forum of Europe, the better chance we have of dealing with this problem.
But as you know perfectly well, it's nothing to do with Brexit. This is to do with the Council of Europe, where we are still members. It's not an EU matter, it's a Council of Europe matter, where we are still members. We just haven't got involved with it.
It's all part of the Brexit dialogue.
Well,
I mean, your whole introduction to this programme this evening was all about attacking the Labour control of the borders. The Tories had no more control than the Labour Party. It's an escalating problem which needs a European solution.
Well, that's not quite right, because we had the Rwanda scheme, which was on the cusp of beginning to act as a deterrent. Indeed, we'd seen people go to the Republic of Ireland rather than coming to the UK before the Rwanda scheme was in. And that it's the convention, not the commission, that is affecting us in relation to illegal migration.
The Rwanda scheme didn't repatriate one single immigrant. And you know it. It never worked. It was never going to work. And the idea that the Rwandans were going to accept 50,000 immigrants coming from this country, or that we were going to persuade them to go there, is simply unrealistic. And the whole failure of this issue goes back much further than this government. It is part, I'll tell you what the problem is, but all over the world, people have got these things and they see the standards of living we enjoy in this country. They are young, ambitious, and they want to share in the action. And until we actually come to some sort of rational European policy, we will be faced with this enormous number of people crossing into Europe from the Mediterranean, the Adriatic, and the Turkish border.
But we have the great advantage of the Channel and a sea border that we can protect, and that we could remove people if we had the determination to do it. And the thing that stopped Rwanda was the Supreme Court ruling on the basis of the Refugee Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights. That's what's stopping us. That's why we need to pull out of those to make decisions for ourselves.
If we could have our Rwanda scheme, you were in power and you couldn't make it work. And the fact is, it was never going to work because it was never big enough to deal with the scale of the problem. And what one's got to understand about this issue is what we've now seen for 80 years is peace in Europe and the creation of a single market, which was Margaret Thatcher's single greatest achievement. That has been fractured by the dialogue about Brexit and the racial undertones that lie with it. And all of this is festered with the immigrant problems that we're talking about. The only realistic solution is to stop the flow of immigrants at the borders of Europe.
We stop the flow of immigrants at the borders of the United Kingdom, and it's not to do with peace. Peace is through NATO, as you know perfectly well, as a very distinguished former Secretary of State for Defence, and that actually we took in 6 million people from the EU who managed to get settled status. And the problem of migration that so annoyed and upset voters, one of the reasons they voted for Brexit, was they didn't want this uncontrolled migration, legal or illegal. They want secure borders, and we can only provide that if we leave the European Convention and the Refugee Convention.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that, first of all, leaving the Court of Convention would be a major step back. We have had 80 years of peace in Europe because we have a code of law which actually governs the way we all behave. And this is completely contrary to the history of our country, which has sent over generations, over hundreds of years, the young people to die on virtually unremembered incidents which actually arose because the politicians failed to get agreement, failed to have some sort of accord, and then were responsible to watch the wars that developed. And all of that has come to an end because we have come to sanity in our arrangements with our Europeans.
All right. Well, it's a great pleasure to have you on, Lord Heseltine, one of the most distinguished Conservatives of the Thatcher period. Thank you for joining me.
It's entirely obvious that we cannot solve the migrant crisis without being in the European Union, because when we were in the European Union, we didn't have this migrant crisis, the boat crisis, supposedly, which we're not even sure if it exists or not. I suspect most of the asylum seekers are coming in the back of lorries. When we were in the European Union, we had the luxury of being in Northern Europe, and the Dublin Convention meant that we could send migrants back to their first country of arrival, which obviously was mostly in Southern Europe. So we were in a good geographical position, being members of the EU, to enjoy that luxury. So for those of you that voted Brexit to stop people coming over here, it was a bad decision. And the data shows that immigration's gone up by 4 times. Nigel Farage persuaded people that Brexit would stop people coming over here, but he then promoted the Australian point system, and we all pointed out the Australian point system liberalises immigration. It was always intended to bring more people to Britain. Presumably Nigel wants to bring more people here so he can make you more angry about it. So maybe think about that. And interesting that his chairman, Zia Yousaf, has now resigned because of the new MP asking about banning the burqa, the absolute low point and stain on our country, is incredible. And the complete disdain for their chairman, who is a Muslim, has been laid bare today. And once again, we're seeing that the party of Nigel Farage only can manage to exist if it is tightly controlled by Nigel Farage. And political parties, funnily enough, can't be tightly controlled by one person. So the unravelling begins again, and the number of enemies that are building up are going to get bigger and stronger, and it is not going to last. But they've lasted long enough to give Keir Starmer the excuse to become right-wing and do bad things by using Brexit as an excuse, because he's being pushed by Blue Labour. That is not what anyone wants. We need a return to a government that listens to the people. 66% of the British public want to be back closer to the European Union. Every month that number gets greater. And the reason for that is because the older population are leaving us and the younger population who are pro-European are joining the electorate. Demographics are ensuring that Brexit is in retreat. And the sooner we have someone in power who respects this reality, the better.